Hey, what's up, everybody? Tommy Meyer here. Today we're going to talk about Biden's plan for climate change. Now, Biden put out a plan last year that was pretty ambitious, but this summer he upgraded it as part of his Build Back Better platform, where he went a lot further than his original plan. And that's what we're going to focus on right now. You can read more about Biden's plan at joebiden.com/clean energy. Now, the new plan is extremely ambitious, and it's even garnered the support of Biden skeptics like the folks over at the Sunrise Movement. Now, Biden often says that when Donald Trump hears climate change, he thinks hoax, but when Biden hears it, he thinks jobs. And that's why we're going to start by talking a little bit about the economy. Biden has very purposefully tied his climate plan to his plans for the economy. Biden's Build Back Better plan is, at its core, about making the economy work for everyone. Now, Biden understands that to solve the economic crisis, first we're going to have to solve the COVID-19 crisis. Biden has a comprehensive plan to get coronavirus under control. That includes a national strategy to scale up testing and tracing, to get workers the proper PPE, give businesses and schools guidelines for how to reopen safely, and of course to protect those most vulnerable like the elderly and people with autoimmune diseases. Biden will also help working families by providing state and local governments with the aid that they need to keep workers employed, by extending the COVID crisis unemployment for those out of work, by providing a comeback package for businesses, and putting people back to work by enlisting them in a public health jobs corps. Other parts of Biden's plan for workers include increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, ending tipped minimum wage and sub-minimum wage for people with disabilities, passing the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, or the PRO Act, which would strengthen collective bargaining rights, passing the Paycheck Fairness Act to ensure women get equal pay for equal work. He would also pass universal paid sick leave and 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. Biden will provide tax credits for working families, including expanding the child tax credit, providing tax credits for affordable health insurance, providing $8,000 in tax credits for child care, tax credits for elder care. He'd also provide up to $15,000 in tax credits to help families buy their first home and build wealth. This will help close the racial wealth gap, since a lot of wealth is built through home ownership, and black families have historically had a difficult time purchasing their own home. But on to the main event, on to Biden's climate change plan. The second plank of his Build Back Better plan is called Sustainable Infrastructure and a Clean Energy Future. Biden has a long history of taking climate change seriously. He introduced one of the first ever climate bills in 1986 as chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He organized hearings on climate change and rallied support for non-binding resolutions. He took executives from BP and Chevron to task for subsidies that the oil industry was getting in 2006. As vice president, he oversaw the Recovery Act, which made the largest single investment in clean energy, and he also helped rally the world for the historic Paris Climate Agreement. Now, I'm not going to waste time going over the science of climate change. It's just real. It just is. All right? We can argue over semantics, over what percentage of scientists believe it's how dangerous. Look, here's the way I look at it. Even if, I'm just going to make up an arbitrary number, 40%. It's way higher. But even if only 40% of scientists believed that climate change was an existential threat to our existence, a 40% chance that life is going to be wiped out, that's not a bet that I'm willing to take. But moving on, Biden will spend $2 trillion over 4 years on infrastructure, the auto industry, transit, power, buildings, housing, innovation, agriculture, conservation, and environmental justice, ensuring that the U.S. achieves net zero emissions no later than 2050. He'll also aim to achieve a carbon-free power sector by 2035. He'll rally the rest of the world to meet the threat of climate change and stand up to polluters who disproportionately affect low-income and communities of color. On day one, Biden will sign executive actions requiring aggressive methane pollution limits for new and existing oil and gas operations, using the federal procurement system to drive towards 100% clean energy and zero-emission vehicles, and ensure that government buildings and facilities are more energy efficient and resilient. And finally, he will sign an order to reduce, not finally, there's way more, but he'll sign an order to reduce emissions from transportation, which is actually the fastest growing source of U.S. climate pollution. Told you there was more. He would double down on advanced biofuels. He would reduce emissions and save consumers money through aggressive appliance and building efficiency standards. He would commit all federal infrastructure investment to reduce climate pollution and consider the effects of greenhouse gas emissions. He would require public companies to disclose climate risks. He wants to conserve 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030 and permanently protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. He would also ban new oil and gas permitting on public lands and waters, modify royalties to account for climate costs, and establish targeted programs to enhance reforestation and develop renewables on foreign land with the goal to double offshore wind by 2030. Biden does not want to ban fracking. No matter how many times Trump says it, it is not true. Now, fracking is controversial, to say the least. Fracking gets us natural gas, which has about 50% the emissions of coal. The abundance of natural gas has helped wean us off of coal, but there are concerns about like methane leaks when extracting gas and chemicals that can pollute drinking water. It hasn't been studied enough. Anyway, Biden's position on it is that we should use it as a bridge fuel because currently battery storage is not, the battery storage capacity is not enough to power a whole economy with things like clean energy and like solar and wind. Donald Trump is partly right when he says, what do you do when the sun's not out or the wind's not blowing? But that comment makes me think that he's never heard of batteries before. I imagine he must be amazed when he unplugs his phone and it stays on. I wish his phone would just turn off and unplugs it. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, battery technology isn't quite there yet. So the argument for fracking is that we need a cleaner fuel source than coal while energy storage technology catches up and while we build this clean energy infrastructure for the future. So while Biden doesn't support an outright ban on fracking, he does want to phase it out. He says no new leases on federal land. Moving on to infrastructure. Infrastructure Week! Woo! But unlike Trump, I actually mean it. Biden will create millions of good-paying union jobs, upgrading our crumbling infrastructure by building smart roads, upgrading schools, airports, rail, ferries, ports. Biden would provide every municipality that has over 100,000 residents with quality public transit by 2030, including light rail, like subways, which we desperately need here in LA. Bus lines, bike lanes, e-scooters, and machine learning optimized traffic lights. So you won't get in that situation where it's 3 a.m. and you're stopped at a red light and there's no one coming and you just feel like you're wasting your life and gas and polluting the environment more. He would set a goal that all new American-built buses be zero emissions by 2030. He would ensure clean drinking water as a right, especially for low-income communities and communities of color, and expand broadband and 5G to lower-income urban schools, rural America, and tribal lands. Now, just like the Obama-Biden administration did 12 years ago, Biden will revitalize the auto industry, creating 1 million new jobs in auto manufacturing, auto supply chains, and auto infrastructure, making sure that the parts that we use to make our cars are made in America. He would make a federal commitment to purchase clean vehicles for federal, state, tribal, postal, and local fleets. He would provide consumer rebates to swap old, less efficient vehicles for newer, cleaner ones. He would restore the full electric vehicle tax credit and add 500,000 public charging stations for electric vehicles. He would also set new and ambitious fuel economy standards and create a government procurement commitment to accelerate research on battery technology. Now, as far as buildings are concerned, Biden would create 1 million jobs, upgrading 4 million buildings, and weatherizing 2 million homes over 4 years. I know that's a lot of numbers. 1, 4, 2, 4, if that helps. I don't think it did. He'll provide direct cash rebates and low-cost financing to upgrade and retrofit homes and appliances to make them more energy efficient. He would upgrade the nation's schools, spur construction of 1.5 million energy-efficient homes and public housing units to address the housing crisis and also save families money. And he would reduce the carbon footprint of buildings by 50% by 2030. But now it's time to talk about ARPA. ARPA, or the Advanced Research Projects on Climate, is a new agency Biden wants to create to target things like grid-scale storage at 1/10 the cost. Refrigerants for refrigerators and air conditioners that have no global warming potential. Zero net energy buildings at zero net cost. Using renewables to produce carbon-free hydrogen, carbon-neutral construction materials, decarbonizing the food and agriculture sector, accelerating the development of carbon capture and sequestration. What carbon capture and sequestration is basically it's when you are able to remove carbon from the air and sequester it underground. Most scientists and experts believe that if we are going to avert the worst effects of climate change, we need to not only stop emitting so much carbon, but we actually need some way of removing the carbon that's already in the air. That's what carbon capture and sequestration does. If it sounds a lot like plants, it is. Biden's agency would also identify the future of nuclear energy and try to make nuclear reactors safer, smaller, and more efficient. Now, got to talk about airline emissions. Airline emissions are a huge driver of global warming, and there are no easy answers. Currently, aviation accounts for about 2% of global emissions, but that is expected to rise. One study found that airline emissions could take up to a quarter of the world's carbon footprint by 2050. To put it into perspective, one cross-country flight emits about as much carbon as some people do in an entire year. Which reminds me, I still need to buy my tickets home to New York for Christmas. I know, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Mother Nature. It's just Mother would kill me before climate change does. It is what it is. Anyway, currently there are very few low-carbon solutions that exist for aircraft, as it takes a lot of energy to make an airplane fly. Biden would incentivize the creation of new sustainable fuels for aircraft, as well as other aircraft technology and standards to reduce their carbon footprint. Now, in terms of sustainable agriculture and conservation, Biden would create 250,000 jobs to clean up local economies by plugging oil and gas wells. The EPA estimates that there are about 2.1 million abandoned wells. These wells leak methane, a gas with 32 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. Yikes. Biden would also establish a new voluntary carbon farming market that rewards farmers for the carbon that they capture and sequester. Again, plants are nature's carbon capture and sequestration technology. And finally, in terms of environmental justice, Biden would set a goal that disadvantaged communities receive 40% of the overall benefits of spending in clean energy and energy efficiency. He would eliminate legacy pollution, which is pollution left over from former generations. He would also replace lead pipes and lead paint in households, childcare centers, and schools, and finally create an economic and climate justice division at the Justice Department. Now, let's compare that to Trump's plan. Okay, yeah, there's some good points on each side. I'm sure they'll have a very substantive conversation about that at the next debate. But I digress. How is he going to pay for it? Well, that kind of brings us full circle back to economic policy. We can't talk about the economy without talking about taxes. As Benjamin Franklin once said, nothing is certain but death and taxes. That is, of course, unless you're Donald Trump, in which case nothing is certain. Everything's thrown out the window. Biden's proposals will be paid for by reversing the Trump tax cuts for corporations and closing loopholes that incentivize tax havens and the shipping of jobs overseas. And he would also raise the corporate tax rate to 28%. It's currently at 21%. And he'll require a 21% minimum tax on all foreign earnings by U.S. companies. He would impose a tax penalty on corporations that ship jobs overseas, raise the top income tax rate back up to 39.6%, and ask those making more than $1 million to pay the same rate on investment income as they would on wages. But Biden will not raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. That's another thing that no matter how many times Trump says it, it will never be true. So that's it. That's Biden's climate plan, as well as some of his plans for the economy and dealing with COVID. I hope that this was illuminating. And if it did turn on any light bulbs up there, I just hope that they were LEDs. Good night.